Well, it was good to see y'all. And we've got two good texts for today. So I'll be curious just to see how our conversation brings us into the text a little bit more. And so before we get started, anybody have any other questions or thoughts or things they want to just put out there in a general kind of way about Bible study or something you heard in the news or anything else that's been on your mind?
News on my mind is it takes place in Florida.
Yeah, right.
Really, every time I watch the news, I'm so saddened by what I see and hear.
Yeah.
About what's going on there. It bothers me a lot.
Yeah, and it seems like people, it's like so close and yet so far away is like what keeps coming to my mind and heart too as I see pictures and just know that there's that heartbreaking reality for people.
Yeah, it really is.
Yeah.
You just wonder if all those city officials, just how guilty are they going to feel now? How do you cope with that guilt?
Yeah.
Just
Yeah, you're right.
knowing something could have been done.
Something could have been done.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
My texts don't have anything directly to the, well, nothing comes to mind immediately, but I think we may hear something as we get maybe a little toward the end. And so we'll just kind of keep that in mind and see if Paul in the letter to the Corinthians gives us anything. I thought we might start with the gospel today. Mark 6, 1-13. And then we'll jump over to 2 Corinthians. Oh, I'm sorry, y'all. Do you want to do 2 Corinthians first, now that you want to turn the page again? I'm sorry. Doing them out of order.
Mark 6.
Yeah, Mark 6. We'll start there. I promise not to do that next time. I promise I'll start with the first reading first. It's called the first reading. I should start there. Sorry. Yeah, so Mark 6, 1-13. Jesus left that place and came to his hometown. Jesus' disciples followed him, and on the Sabbath he began to teach in the synagogue, and many who heard him were astounded. They said, "Where did this man get all this? What is this wisdom that has been given to him? What deeds of power are being done by his hands? Is not this the carpenter, the son of Mary and brother of James and Joseph and Judas and Simon? Are not his sisters here with us?" And they took offense at him. And Jesus said to them, "Well, prophets are not without honor except in their hometown and among their own kin and in their own house." And he could do no deed of power there except that he laid his hands on a few people, sick people, and cured them. And he was amazed at their unbelief. And then he went about among the villages teaching. He called the 12 and began to send them out 2 by 2 and gave them authority over the unclean spirits. He ordered them to take nothing for their journey except a staff, no bread, no bag, no money in their belts, but to wear sandals and not to put on 2 tunics. He said to them, "Wherever you enter a house, stay there until you leave the place. If any place will not welcome you and they refuse to hear you as you leave, shake off the dust that is on your feet as a testimony against them." So they went out and proclaimed that all should repent. They cast out many demons and anointed with oil many who were sick and cured them. Sunday's Gospel. So any questions come up for you or anything catch your attention in this one? It's a continuation of the readings we've been doing, and so he left that place, and so he left that area where he healed Jairus' daughter. That's kind of the last thing.
We don't hear too much about other sons or the brothers.
Hey, yeah, right? Jesus' family is listed there. Yeah, I have some curiosity about that as well. What was his family like? Who are these sisters who are here with us?
So there were sisters too.
Yeah. Yeah, so it kind of has two parts. It's kind of got this two parts, just by the way they, of course, have given it to us in two paragraphs, two parts here. Any other things that catch your attention? So this is Jesus' first appearance at the synagogue in his hometown, but not his first appearance at a synagogue. So yeah, like Carol says, this is like his family's there. It's also his hometown synagogue, so it wouldn't have been the first time he'd been there. As we were hearing it, I noticed that kind of shift. There's a shift that happens in those first verses, right? One where they move from astonishment to outrage, and the statement "Son of Mary" is kind of what begins it. Is this not the Son of Mary? And the commentators will say that's meant to be to hint at Jesus's illegitimate status. And so this is the place where that's coming up. So Jesus not having a father, or rather Jesus, Mary being pregnant before she was wedded to Joseph. So apparently that is a hot button issue still among Jesus's neighbors.
Sometimes it changed.
Yeah. So, and so then that other thread that's in there about honor, right? Jesus names that situation, right? He calls himself a prophet and then says, prophets, there's no honor for them in their hometown. And this kind of hints at the way honor is a part of their culture, right? And so local prophets and teachers would have been given honor, right? They would have been given that. That would have been something that was part of their kind of their payment package, if you will. And it was a fixed amount. And within their community, there's only so much honor to go around. And so with Jesus popping up, if they were to give him honor, it would mean that they would have to take honor away from, in their minds, from the local prophets and teachers. Since there were other prophets and teachers in the area. And so in some ways it's a little bit more mundane, it's a little bit more kind of economic, if you will. Though they also will bring in Jesus's family story into this as a way of not giving him honor, or not reasoning for, well, he does all these great things, or he's doing all these great things, but never mind that. And again, as Jesus mentions, there's a tradition of this not happening, right? This doesn't happen for prophets and teachers. They don't go home and have and receive honor. They also point out that Jesus, as we're trying to figure out who Jesus is in the Gospel of Mark, Jesus will also hint at himself being a kind of countercultural figure here, right? The prophets had very countercultural jobs, and their roles were difficult, and they spoke very difficult things. So Jesus is identifying himself a little bit here with them.
David, it might not be related to the topic, but
that's okay.
I often wonder about the Jewish people think Jesus was a prophet, not the Son of God.
Yeah.
Is this the beginning of that kind of thing because they thought he was a prophet?
Yeah. Well, maybe not the beginning of it, but it pulls out part of that strain, okay. Right? Because Jesus names himself as similar to a prophet. Jesus had prophetic. He spoke like a prophet. He did prophetic things, and so that you're onto it. That's the whole, and not, well, everybody, Jew or Gentile, they ask that question: who is this guy? What's the deal? And so that's why the Gospel of Mark is set up this way, so that you can say, yeah, I've been asking that question too. Who is this guy?
Is there anywhere in the Bible it says where Jesus got his training from, or was this?
No.
Not at all.
Nope. It's not listed,
Not listed.
unfortunately. Though there is though I have heard somebody talk a little bit about what it would have been like for him to be recognized as a rabbinical teacher, as a someone who could travel to synagogues. So all the kids, so their faith formation program would have been in learning Hebrew. They wouldn't have spoken Hebrew. Well, it may not have been spoken, and so they would have had to learn it. And then, as kids, then they would have been invited to memorize parts of the Torah, so the first 5 books. And the kids who did that the best, who were proficient at both those things, learning the language and memorizing the Torah, then would have been invited to continue on and learn more and memorize more. And so then they would have begun to learn memorize the commentaries, other commentaries.
What is that?
And so it will be like would it have been Talmudic at that point? No, it would have been, well, yeah, it would have. And so I think if my memory is right, there's a collection called Midrash, which is rabbinical teachings on the Torah. And so then they memorize that as well. And so you would know, you would have memorized sacred scripture, and then you would also have memorized 5 or 6 commentaries on a verse or 2 or on a story to help understand it. And then during the Babylonian exile, when the people were exiled to, and teachers were exiled to Babylon or around the kingdom, then there another set of commentaries were created, because living a Jewish life then became different in Gentile situations. So they had to adapt it, and so then those adaptations and the commentary on the adaptations then became what was called Talmud, which was similar to Midrash. So then they would have memorized. So Jesus would have memorized that. Then Jesus would have memorized the prophets, what we call the prophets, and the historical books.
Wow.
So
Lots of training.
yeah, so he memorized all that. And so then if you kind of came in, if you weren't so good, or you just burned out, or you just needed to go do something else, you took on the family profession. And so in some sense, Jesus has done that, because Jesus is also a carpenter. And so that's another one of the complaints that they list here. Oh, the carpenter? We're letting the carpenter talk in the synagogue now? Right? So he flunked out, or maybe he's a better carpenter than he is a rabbinical student. So that's part of it. That's a kind of a snapshot at it. And so then after that, after they had memorized all that, then they would have had to apprentice to somebody. So then they would have had to ask a traveling rabbi whether they could journey with them and learn from them. And so then that would have been part of Jesus' training as well. And so then all that happens, and now here Jesus is back at home, and illegitimate son, carpenter, right? And so they're not ready to move Jesus out of the shame category yet, right? Some people get honor in this culture, other people get shame. And so that's the kind of dynamic they're working with, and that's where they're going to keep Jesus right now. I'm trying to think what other... Okay, so then there's that dynamic of the way faith and the healings are connected, right? And in some ways we think, oh, well, people's faith means Jesus can't do the work here. The commentator will say maybe Jesus chooses not to do the work because of their faith. Because other places in the Gospel of Mark, God is not impeded by people's faith. Jesus is not impeded by people's lack of faith. It's not essential for it to happen. But in this case, maybe Jesus chooses not to. In Luke and Matthew, they clean it up so that there's no question, right? Mark is fine to leave it open, right? Maybe Jesus isn't all powerful. But in Matthew and Luke, Jesus chooses not to do it. And they say, so that it looks like Jesus still is, all powerful.
I wonder how he knew he was.
Yeah. Especially in the Gospel of Mark,
Wow.
right? Because there are fewer indications for Jesus in the Gospel of Mark. And we should... Anyways, so in the Gospel of Mark, the first clue may have been for him when he was baptized. And so when the heavens split open and a voice from heaven says, "You are my beloved son." That's not quite an instruction manual on what to do with your life. We wonder what that experience was like for Jesus to have heard that and seen those things, and to see everybody else's reaction around him while that's happening. And then, and then to go into the wilderness, right? And to have that exchange with the devil in the same way. And then whatever happened in the midst of all that.
I can't imagine what his child life was like. I mean, as a child. I mean,
Yeah.
we see children, and he was so different from all the children. Was this something, I don't know. It's just trying to imagine what his life was like is just unbelievable.
Yeah, it would be helpful in some
Did he
ways.
have all that wisdom as a young child?
If we switch over to the Gospel of Luke, yes, he did, right?
He did.
Gospel of Luke, right? He ends up at 12. He's in the synagogue, and
Right.
the rabbis are
Right.
astounded at what he knows. So,
Mm-hmm.
I was just thinking, couldn't Mary step in and say to the kids, your oldest brother is an immaculate conception with something on that?
yeah,
And then the rest of them were now questioning. Some accepted, but some didn't. And she could kind of be the referee and simply say, this is what happened. These magi came with all these
Yes.
beautiful things that kept us going. We went to a small town and we became known as nice people, but it's kind of not a big town. But now your son is bringing forth all of these. He's blessing people, he's healing people, and now you're beginning to question him like he's some demonic character or something. And I just thought to myself, it would almost seem like she could, set them straight or describe some of the stuff earlier they wouldn't understand. Or maybe it's just the case that even if you have these things going on in front of you, you just don't buy it because you say, I've been with this guy for over 30 years.
Mm-hmm.
And, he didn't do any of that stuff earlier.
Yeah.
So now he's got all this superpower. This looks...
You think that's great? That's not great.
Yeah.
You should see.
Yeah.
Yeah. Let's see. Yeah. So I'll spend some research time on this and see what I can get you, because I don't remember. Okay. So part of what we're thinking about is like Jesus' family life, and part of the confusion might be that, well, let me look and see what happens in the Gospel of Luke and in the Gospel of Matthew and what his family are like there. Because it's not to say that Jesus wasn't born in a dramatic, beautiful way. But in the Gospel of Mark, we don't have that story. So these characters in this story, in some ways, don't have that. They don't have that. Or at least there isn't a rationale for we don't have enough pieces in the Gospel of Mark. We don't have those pieces. There's no magi in the Gospel of Mark. There's no We don't know how Jesus' birth comes about. But we do have this character who is a little wild and comes out of nowhere at the age of 30, Jesus. And so part of it may be that, in the way that people's spiritual memory and their storytelling has unfolded, if that makes sense. The writer of Mark maybe took some liberties, or Matthew and Luke took some liberties to tell parts of the story in a certain way. So I'll get back to you.
Okay.
Because I don't know. Yeah, I don't.
And Jesus never explained what his child life was.
Right, because in Luke the argument makes total sense.
Who would know?
Right? Mary treasures all these things in her heart. We know that, right? And so yeah, she's got these things she can say to them. And so let me just check and see what kind of a character Mary is in Luke and Matthew, and just see.
So much about Joseph either.
Yeah, Joseph either.
Yeah.
No,
Yeah.
we don't. Mm-hmm.
Well, like I said, and now we've got all these family members too,
I was
right?
just going to say, is he the mom?
And back to Diane's other point, it would be helpful for us to understand what Jesus' early life was like and what he looked like as a kid. It makes him more human, right? And it's also a big part of our faith. God became human. And,
Did the
and
Dead
that's
Sea
important.
Scrolls, this is off the subject, but
Sure,
did
no,
the
we're-
Dead Sea
we're all good.
Scrolls, do they have anything to do with telling of the life of Jesus, or
No.
nothing at all?
I don't think so. My memory of the Dead Sea Scrolls is that they were that they would have been Hebrew Bible texts.
Oh, okay. But nothing about Jesus' life.
or so they the community I think it's Qumran is the name of the community that owned these scrolls. So they imagine a kind of like community of followers of religious people that lived in this area, had these scrolls, and they used these as their sacred texts. And so they were similar to like the followers of John the Baptist, similar to Jesus, the followers of Jesus in the early community. But I don't remember the overlaps between this community, John the Baptist community, and Jesus' community. So let me put that down too. That's a good follow-up topic as well.
Always fascinated us. Dick and I saw actually where they discovered.
I know. Yeah. See, that's what I was gonna say. I think I thought y'all remembered we're there.
And that was so cool to think that young boys.
Do you remember when that became public? When they?
Oh.
Because that was.
The gentleman that was with us.
That was with
one that tried to decipher. Remember, he was a pastor. He was a pastor, and he said, "I actually helped decipher the Dead Sea Scrolls."
Yeah.
And the kids, how they found it was they were just throwing stones in this cave.
Yep.
And they heard a noise, and they went in the cave, and here were these huge, what do you call it? And they thought, oh my goodness.
Clay
And
jars,
they
giant
took it
clay
out,
jars.
Went into town and sold them
Yep.
into town. And then because they knew they were valuable, they went back again and found more. And then kept on selling them because they knew they were valuable. Had no idea what they were. But it was fascinating, just fascinating to go by and think, oh my goodness, this is where the Dead Sea Scrolls were found.
The name of the cave is the Cave of Horror.
Yes, yes. Yeah,
So of
it
course
was-
people didn't want to go in there.
but
Let's see. Yeah, Jewish. It says Jewish and Hebrew texts. Trying to find when they came. Yeah, and of course I always picture like just a little cave in a hill. Like these pictures are like, they look huge, Diane.
Yes, they were. I mean, you couldn't even get up to them because they had to. But
Yeah.
They were just, kids in the field that were having fun.
Yeah, so the initial discovery was in 1946 and 1947.
There you go, in the 40s.
So yeah, within
Yeah.
kind of our living memory. So
Mhm.
I think that also makes it kind of interesting and exciting too for people. But I'll get some more information on the Dead Sea Scrolls for next time too.
And Diane, what did you say the material was? What were they made out of?
The scrolls were just like parchment.
Oh, they didn't.
And they were rolled up, stuck into these huge, what would you say they were, Dick? I don't know.
tubes or something.
Yeah, there were tubes that were stuck into like, I don't know, containers of some sort
Yeah.
that were made, and that's where they kept them, you know, to preserve them. And they were just taking them out and sold them in town, and then came back again. And
Yep.
Amazing, yeah. They were making money.
Well, and we also have this, and so part of this question will also hint at what, but we'll also bring, I'll also see if I can, those contemporary sources. So, Dead Sea Scrolls and the archaeological stuff from that area, as well as, there's some other things, they're called contemporary sources, that are like things that aren't the Gospels, but they add information to what we know about the Gospels and Jesus' community. Let's see. So then the other part of this text then is the disciples going out. So the commentator will say Jesus' rejection here is really what spurs on. Okay, so actually it doesn't, but it's time now. When this rejection happens, then that indicates it's time for the disciples to go out. And so in some ways it's like, just so you know, this is going to be hard. In the Gospel of Mark, the disciples were always meant to go out and teach and do Jesus' ministry. It's why they were called. So they always knew that that's what they were going to be doing. And so then this moment happens, this moment of rejection for Jesus happens, and so then that's, the page turns, and now it's the disciples' turn. And so it's kind of like, okay, you've seen the good stuff, you've seen the bad stuff, now it's your turn. And so they get sent out, and they point out it's important that, Jesus' ministry took many forms. He had a synagogue ministry, he had a house ministry, and so the disciples are doing a house ministry. We hear, right, that they're going to go to people's houses and stay in people's houses. And that was a common practice. And the oil is unique. And so he tells them to take oil. And so that the commentators suggest that might be something unique to the community, the community that's hearing this gospel for the first time, or the community that this came out of, that the people who told the Mark story, who lived Jesus's ministry through the Mark story, they used oil in their healings and in their prayers. I think the thing that they don't say is that it doesn't happen elsewhere, and I don't know that how that really, if that's true or not. But yeah.
Why do you think he was so specific and don't take this?
Yeah.
Don't take that?
Let me go back and look at the list. So while I'm going back up there, I'll say, in this list is different than other lists. Like, so in Mark or in Luke and Matthew, he doesn't tell them to take a staff and sandals. Apparently the staff and the sandals are unique to Mark because they're going to go on a longer journey. They're going farther afield for a longer amount of time. And then I think the other conventional wisdom that I think I remember from this is because he wants them to rely on the people. He wants them to kind of to accept people's hospitality. And again, that people's hospitality in the ancient world is synonymous with the ancient world. Hospitality was a given, and that you would go places and people would take you in, because that's how the world worked. It was an honorable thing to do, and your status in the community was like how many people you could take in. Like, could you take in and house people? Did you have extra to share with people, right? And so you received honor for being able to do that. Tim?
I'm not saying I'm Jesus or anything. Interesting enough,
Well, some of us have been wondering.
For whatever, is that when I was in high school, the high school band director said the hardest audience you have is your hometown audience.
Yeah.
And I have felt, actually, when I played in Hillsborough, performed even at the Orient, I heard recording this, but it's the hometown audience is the hardest.
Is it?
I think it is. And just having that feeling.
Yeah.
Because,
I don't know what it is. I don't know what it is.
well,
It's
I-
But
interesting.
it's true, I think.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's funny, just as simple as like, when our son was playing football, he said, it's very hard to come home
Yeah.
and play, because people expect so much of you, maybe.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Yes, and
Maybe.
you don't want to disappoint them.
Sports too.
You
Yeah.
don't want to disappoint them.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's,
Those are some interesting layers. I like that.
yeah.
I'll have to keep thinking about that.
Does Jesus appear to Mary as part of the resurrection?
Yeah, but I don't remember which Mary.
Yeah.
They're not. Yeah. So let me look at
Because
that
that
too.
would solve the whole problem with the family. You know, she just
We got to get that family. We got to get that family on board.
Don't we?
Yeah.
We're solvers.
Yep.
Oh, but-
I'll add that to my list because I don't remember. Well, Mary is listed, and sometimes there are like 3 Marys, and definitely in John. Well, so in John's the one is the one I remember, and we don't have this problem in John because Jesus' mother is part of the community. So Jesus' mother, we have the opposite story. So the wedding at Cana, Mary's like, go do your thing. Go turn that water into wine, and let's be done with this because you're the Son of God. Right? And so then at the end, at the crucifixion, right, she's there, and Jesus says, okay, John, you're now going to be her son, and Mary, you're now John's mother. And so it's not just the family, it would have been part of the significance, right? Like, Jesus wouldn't have said that if his mother wasn't part of the believing community. So in the Gospel of John, we don't have that question. That's good. We got to it. So that's a better example than the Matthew, Mark, Luke dynamic that kind of just shows that Jesus' family played a different part. The writers told different stories about Jesus' family in the different Gospels. So that's a good example of it. Okay. I'm trying to think. I have 10 minutes. If we would like to move on to 2 Corinthians. If y'all need to go, it is noon. But we can spend about 10 minutes on 2 Corinthians if you're interested. I don't have anything else on Mark and Jesus' being in his hometown. This has got good stuff in it too. Lots of good questions, so we'll have lots of fun stuff to talk about next week. Okay. So Paul's writing this to the community in Corinth. And he says, I, Paul, know a person in Christ who 14 years ago was caught up to the third heaven. Whether in the body or out of the body, I do not know. God knows. And I know that such a person, whether in the body or out of the body, I do not know, God knows, was caught up into paradise and heard things that are not to be told, that no mortal is permitted to repeat. On behalf of such a one, I will boast. But on my own behalf, I will not boast except of my weaknesses. But if I wish to boast, I will not be a fool, for I will be speaking the truth, but I refrain from it, so that no one may think better of me than what is seen in me or heard from me, even considering the exceptional character of the revelations. Therefore, to keep me from being too elated, a thorn was given me in the flesh, a messenger of Satan to torment me, to keep me from being too elated. 3 times I appealed to the Lord about this, that it would leave me. But he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for power is made perfect in weakness. And so I, Paul, will boast all the more gladly of my weaknesses, so that the power of Christ may dwell in me. Therefore, I am content with weaknesses, insults, hardships, persecutions, and calamities for the sake of Christ. For whenever I am weak, then I am strong. So there's the first reading. We read it, I think we read it every 3 years, but it's a well-known one. It's more so well-known than that. The people reading this letter have no doubt that Paul's says he's not talking about himself, but he is talking about himself. And his kind of rhetorical strategy is just to say he wouldn't even claim that story about himself. That story that's so good, that's so right, that he received this revelation in heaven, possibly, things that are not meant for other mortals to hear. But Paul is so convinced that weakness is the place to be that he wouldn't even talk about the good stuff if you made him. He wouldn't even claim it. So it's kind of part of his rhetorical strategy here. Other questions or thoughts or things that catch your attention in this before we move on anymore?
Jim?
Does this have anything to do with humility, or is weakness more? I mean, it was unclear to me whether weakness
That's a good question.
humility has anything to do with this.
I will look more closely at it. But I think yes. I think it is. I think it is this, right? Like, no matter how great your human accomplishments may be, it's always helpful to consider God's power and strength and God's agency in your life in the midst of that. Is kind of what Paul's trying to, convey here. And yet, right, we're still in this honor and shame culture too, and so oftentimes weaknesses would always be seen as a shame, right? Sickness, well, and we still even carry this on, right? Oh, I'm sick. I must have done something wrong. Something bad happened. I must have done something wrong. It's even hard I've heard it's even hard for some people to call in sick, that they feel that they're ashamed that they can't go to work because they just can't do it. And so again, he is still trying to, in some ways, get people to think differently about these things that he's labeling weaknesses. And yet we may think about as humility or our own personal human limitations, our own individual limitations. Right, so that's kind of where I landed and where I left it, in this idea that I wonder what the limits, failures, and weaknesses in my life have been that have become powerful for me or become significant for me. Paul will even go on to say that they're blessings, right? To know. I feel like the conventional wisdom is like, if you know your limits, that's a good thing, and as long as you know your limits, that's they don't have to be bad. So I think the weakness is this place of weakness and limitation, I think, is what connects these two stories, right? Why these two texts were chosen together. I have no idea how it's gonna come out in a sermon on Sunday. Because this week is also, right, so we have July 4th happening kind of in the midst. And then we also have, the kind of photos and focus are around the July 4th parade, I think. But I'm not sure how that relates to the ministry. So it'll be interesting to see how it all comes together. Because July 4th really isn't a holiday about weakness at all. So anyway. Any other thoughts or questions? Or thank you all.
Good.
It was fun today. Thank you for the those connecting questions, and we'll explore those a little bit more in fun ways here in the coming weeks.